In Stellar Blade, you get 3 different skill trees to start off with. You earn skill points for these trees by defeating enemies and completing quests. But the big question is, where do you invest all these skill points once you have them, especially in the early game? Well, we're going to answer that question for you by telling you which skills are worth investing in early on and why the first skills I would recommend unlocking are going to come from your survival skill tree. Starting off with this skill tree is insanely useful for plenty of reasons, mostly because it makes pretty much everything you want to do in combat way easier. For example, Focus Boost. This is a passive perk in the survival tree that helps you hit perfect parries more often. Focus Boost does this by widening the timing window for them. It may not sound like much at first, but if you're familiar with games like Sekiro or Liza P, just like them, this game's entire combat system revolves around executing well-timed parries and dodges. Because this game places such a heavy emphasis on these two mechanics, widening your timing windows for them will make a huge difference throughout your entire playthrough. Which brings us to our next perk, Reflex Boost. Reflex Boost does the same thing that Focus Boost does, but applies it to perfect dodging. It's also worth noting that perfect dodges fill your burst meter, but that's something to unlock later in the game, so we won't get into that now. Another skill that pairs nicely with the perfect dodge is Reflection. Reflection is a combat attack skill that stuns the enemy and increases your attack speed after a perfect dodge, which comes in very handy. Speaking of dodges, Double Dodge allows you to dodge back to back, making combat encounters less punishing, and adds a new layer of flexibility to Eve's movement. The extra mobility provided by Double Dodge isn't just for your damage mitigation. It also helps you reposition Eve quicker, allowing you to launch your own counterattacks without putting yourself in harm's way. I notice it's also a huge help when I'm getting dogpiled by groups of enemies just to get out of there and reposition. These next two skills are pretty much mandatory if you want to stay aggressive while avoiding damage, and they actually came in super clutch throughout my entire playthrough. The first one is Blink. Blink evades fatal attacks by teleporting Eve behind the enemy, so she could launch her own counters that stun them. Later on in the game, this is also going to charge up another thing known as burst energy, but you'll worry about that later on. The second one is Repulse, which pushes enemies away when they go for fatal attacks and highlights their weak points so Eve can target them with her gun for boosted damage. Now, you won't have access right away when you start the game, so I recommend a skill like Shockwave in these situations so you can deal damage from a distance if you have the meter for it. When an enemy is going for one of those fatal attacks, you'll see a flash of blue or purple light indicating that this is your chance to use one of these skills. It may seem natural to go for a dodge right away to land those blinks and repulses, but if you ignore that initial impulse and wait for your sword to glow in response, you'll nail the window for these moves pretty much every single time. That made these skills overpowered for me throughout pretty much my entire playthrough. So naturally, my next recommendation would be Threat Detection, which makes it easier for you to blink and repulse, and considering how useful those two can be, as you have seen, this one is pretty much a no-brainer. Counter is also a great skill to invest into, as it's a follow-up attack after a perfect parry that dashes behind the enemy, stunning them and then temporarily increasing Eve's melee damage. You'll later find a reflex type exospine in the game that pairs perfectly with the skill tree, because when fully upgraded, it makes it easier to use perfect dodge, perfect parry, and regenerate shield faster while blocking. By the way, if you don't like how you spent your skill points, you can always reset them at any time by visiting a skill kiosk and using an SP initializer. SP initializers can be purchased from Kaya's shop or any supply camps for 200 gold. Using the SP initializer completely resets the selected skill tree, giving you back all the skill points you spent on it and allowing you to use them again anywhere you'd like. So don't worry about messing up. The second major skill tree I would focus on is Attack. This tree provides Eve with powerful offense skills that significantly improve her damage output and combat flow. Most of the perk upgrades are geared towards increased attack, speeds, extended combos, and boosted damage. Calculated aggression will pay off in this game, especially if you tend to have more parry heavy or beta reliant playstyle. If that sounds like you, these trees perks are going to be your bread and butter. The first skill I suggest grabbing from the attack tree is called Ambush. Ambush allows you to sneak up on enemies and stealth kill them without having to deal with a drawn out one-on-one. This saves you a ton of time and frustration when you're running through tough areas, looking for specific items, or even just farming some SP before a boss fight. Another cool thing about ambush is that even if you're spotted by the enemy, you can de-aggro and then come back for the ambush when you're out of the field of view. And if you're a fan of ambush, then you are definitely going to want to grab Chain Charge. Chain Charge is a follow-up attack to ambush that targets another nearby enemy and assassinates them, so you can take down 2 enemies really quickly back to back. Now, to enhance your ambush and your chain charge even further, when you make it to the wasteland in the game and unlock a quest that wants you to visit a tower to restore power to the camps of the wild, when you're climbing up on this tower, you're going to find something known as a camouflage type exospine. This is insanely useful as it's going to decrease the enemy's field of view, making it very hard for them to detect you and allowing you to start stealth killing. Pairing this with your ambush skill and your chain charge makes this so much faster to just one-shot enemies all the time and actually get that second kill with the chain charge. They literally can't see you coming. On to our next skill. Rush is my go-to skill for closing gaps and pressuring enemies. It allows Eve to instantly charge at them from afar and initiate combos pretty quickly. It's also excellent for surprise attacks when you can't use ambush, seeing as most of the enemies you target will end up getting hit by Rush before they even know you're there. Getting the advanced versions of Rush like Lightning Rush and Infinite Rush are no-brainers when it comes to perk upgrades. The Lightning and Infinite Rush perks extend the distance you travel when you're using Rush dramatically, which allows you to cover a lot more ground when dashing. It would be nice if you could use this skill for traversal, but the cooldown gauge represented by this circle here keeps you from spamming it for travel purposes. On your skill tree, you'll also see these beta chain skills that basically make the last hits of your combo attacks deal more damage. It'll stun the enemy and recharge burst energy when it lands. This is pretty much found in all of the skill trees for different things, but it's really important to charge up your burst energy so you can execute more powerful attacks later on. The next skill tree is the beta skill tree, and they become a lot more effective as you progress and upgrade them. Once you learn when and how to mix them into combos, they can make a huge difference in tight situations. With that being said, here are some of the most important perks you should unlock first for your beta skills. Starting with Shockwave, which is probably my favorite beta skill of the group. Shockwave lets Eve use the Blood Edge to unleash waves of energy at the enemies. Not only does that make it an excellent range option, but it also does extra damage from close range when the blade and the beams hit the enemy at the exact same time. Shockwave is perfect for maintaining distance while still maintaining damage. And seeing as you don't get the gun when you start the game right away, this is going to be your only real option for dealing range damage early on. Not only does this thing hit like a truck, but it also stuns or downs anything it touches upon impact when fully upgraded. The next one is Triplet, which is a multi-hit frontal assault you start off with. It's great for dealing heavy damage to single targets or pushing back enemies trying to smother you. The third attack on Triplet always stuns enemies, but you are going to want to upgrade Triplet as quickly as possible to unlock Quadruplet. Very creative, which will stun enemies from the very first strike, doing damage to their balance gauge and enabling you to perform retribution attacks much quicker. Naturally, I'm going to recommend grabbing damage boost for each of these skills just to make sure we are maximizing our damage output as much as possible while we are using them. Now, my third one I like is Slash, which allows Eve to launch a 180-degree energy blade slash that stuns everything it touches. If you're a fan of this move, then you should probably also grab Crescent Slash from that exact branch as well to chain more stuns and finishing blows together, allowing you to slice through mobs that try to swarm you in battle. It seriously helps you out when there are tons of enemies on you. Now, when you find yourself later on in the game, there's also an exospine called the Beta Trance Exospine. When this is fully upgraded, it increases your beta energy recharge, raises the attack power of all your beta skills, and makes it so that landing beta skill hits have a chance to put Eve into a trance. While in a trance, Eve's beta skills no longer consume any beta energy at all, which is actually kind of broken when you think about it. Of course, all the skill trees have ways of you increasing your beta energy, so if you want to go further with that, unlock those in those specific skill trees. Now, beta skills are probably the least beneficial to unlock and invest in early on, not because they aren't powerful, but mostly just because they can be kind of gimmicky early on compared to some of the more practical skills like Blink or Ambush that we talked about earlier. Let me know what skills you think are most important to unlock in the early game in the comments down below, and check out this video that's on the screen.